A state lottery office should have been neutral ground. But under bright press lights, Luke Woods stood at the podium and claimed a $300 million prize as if no one else had ever existed. When Melinda Woods stepped forward, a guard blocked her path. Luke didn't look at her. He called her irrelevant. Cameras captured everything. No one intervened. Melinda didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held a thin envelope at her side, the one detail Luke had never thought to question, because the ownership of that ticket had already been decided long before this moment. If you believe some truths don't need to be spoken to be proven, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and your local time, and if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Columbus, Ohio did not promise transformation. It offered stability, routine, and the quiet kind of life that required patience more than ambition. The neighborhoods were lined with modest houses, each one holding stories that rarely made it beyond their own walls. The Woods home stood among them, indistinguishable. At a glance, its exterior maintained just well enough to avoid attention. Inside, however, there was a difference. Not in what could be seen, but in what was carefully preserved. Melinda Woods did not believe in leaving things undocumented. Every receipt had a place. Every transaction had a record. Every decision, no matter how small, could be traced backward if necessary. It was not paranoia. It was discipline built over years of watching how easily details could be lost and how costly that loss could become. The kitchen table often served as her workspace, not because she lacked a proper office, but because it allowed her to remain present in the center of the home while she worked. A laptop, a stack of neatly labeled folders, and a small receipt scanner formed a system that few would notice and even fewer would understand. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local dental practice, but her attention to detail extended far beyond her job. The household budget, the insurance policies, the mortgage payments. Each category was monitored with a precision that turned uncertainty into something measurable. Luke Woods did not share that perspective. He moved through the same space with a different kind of energy, restless, forward-looking, and increasingly dissatisfied. His work in regional sales had once provided a sense of momentum, but over time, that momentum had stalled. Targets became harder to reach. Commissions became less predictable. Conversations about next quarter began to feel like placeholders rather than plans. He did not say this directly. Instead, it appeared in smaller ways. A comment about how other people were getting ahead faster. A remark about how playing it safe was another way of falling behind. A tone that suggested that patience was no longer a virtue, but a limitation. Melinda listened when he spoke, though she rarely responded immediately. She had learned that some statements were not meant to invite discussion, but to release frustration. And frustration, she understood, often revealed more than intention. Luke saw her silence differently. To him, it looked like agreement without vision, like acceptance without ambition. He began to describe her habits as cautious, then as limiting, and eventually as something closer to fear. "You track everything," he said one evening, standing by the counter while she reviewed a set of monthly expenses. "But what's the point if nothing changes?" Melinda did not look up right away. She finished entering the final number, saved the file, and only then met his gaze. "Things change," she said quietly, "just not all at once." Luke let out a short breath, something between a laugh and dismissal. "That's exactly what I mean." There was no argument that followed. There rarely was. Their disagreements did not escalate. They settled instead into a pattern, one where Luke spoke in terms of possibility, and Melinda responded with structure. Neither approach was inherently wrong, but together they created a tension that did not resolve. Over time, Luke began to look elsewhere, for something that felt less constrained. It started with conversations at work colleagues who talked about quick wins, about opportunities that required less patience and more risk. Stories about people who had finally caught a break began to hold a certain appeal. Not because they were common, but because they suggested that change did not always require slow accumulation. Sometimes it just required the right moment. Melinda was aware of these shifts, though Luke never presented them as such. She noticed the way he lingered on certain topics, the way he checked his phone more frequently, the way his tone changed when discussing the future. She did not confront him about it. Not because she didn't care, but because she understood that confrontation in this case would not create clarity. It would only create resistance. Instead, she continued to observe. The system she had built for their finances remained intact, but she began to add layers, more detailed notes, more precise categorizations, more frequent backups. Not because anything had gone wrong, but because she sensed that something eventually might. It was not a prediction. It was a precaution. Luke, meanwhile, interpreted her consistency as stagnation. He began to make decisions without consulting her at first in small ways. A purchase here, a subscription there. Each one justified as insignificant, each one adding a slight imbalance to a system designed for equilibrium. Melinda noticed every change. Not immediately in reaction, but eventually in pattern. A deviation from expected totals. A recurring charge that had not been discussed. A withdrawal that did not align with their usual spending. She did not accuse him. She documented. There was a difference between knowing something and proving it. Melinda understood that distinction clearly. One evening, as she updated their monthly overview, she paused briefly at a series of minor expenses. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they suggested something else, a shift not just in spending but in intention. She opened a separate folder and began to compile the relevant records. Dates, amount, sources. Each entry aligned with the others, forming a sequence that could be followed if necessary. Luke walked past her during this process, glancing briefly at the screen. "You're still doing that?" He asked, his tone light but edged with impatience. "Yes," Melinda replied. "For what?" She considered the question for a moment, not because she lacked an answer, but because she understood that the answer itself would not satisfy him. "For clarity," she said. Luke shook his head slightly and continued on. To him, clarity was not something that required effort. It was something that would appear when circumstances changed, when an opportunity presented itself, when a decision paid off. Melinda saw it differently. Clarity was built, piece by piece, quietly, without assumption. That night, after Luke had gone to bed, she remained at the table a little longer than usual. Not out of urgency, but out of habit. She reviewed the files one more time, ensuring that everything was where it should be. Then she closed the folders, powered down her laptop, and sat in the stillness of the room. There was no immediate conflict. No raised voices, no visible fracture. But there was a shift. Not in what had happened, but in what had been recognized. And recognition, once it occurred, did not reverse itself. Melinda did not yet know how that shift would unfold. She did not try to predict it. Prediction required assumptions, and assumptions introduced error. Instead, she relied on what she could control: documentation, observation, preparation. Across the house, Luke slept with a different kind of certainty, the belief that change would come from something external, something sudden, something beyond calculation. Neither of them spoke about the distance that had formed between those two perspectives. But it was there, quiet, unresolved, and already shaping everything that would follow. Luke Woods did not begin buying lottery tickets as a habit. It started as a gesture, something small, almost ironic, a way to acknowledge the possibility of change, without fully committing to it. At first, it was one ticket at the end of a long workday, purchased alongside a bottle of soda or a pack of gum. The kind of decision that did not require explanation. He did not tell Melinda about it immediately. not because he thought she would object, but because he anticipated the conversation that would follow. She would ask how often. She would ask how much. She would place it somewhere within their monthly structure, and in doing so, reduce it to something predictable. Luke did not want it to be predictable. To him, the appeal of the lottery was not the odds. It was the interruption of them. The idea that something could happen outside of planning, outside of control, outside of the careful systems Melinda trusted. When he did mention it, it was in passing. "Picked up a ticket today," he said one evening, placing his keys on the counter. Melinda looked up briefly from the table where a set of invoices lay neatly arranged. "How much?" she asked. $2. She nodded once. That was all. No further questions, no immediate concern. From her perspective, the expense was negligible. From his, the response felt dismissive. Over the next few weeks, the purchases continued. Not daily, but regularly enough to become a pattern. Sometimes one ticket, sometimes two. Occasionally more when the advertised jackpot climbed into numbers that seemed less like currency and more like abstraction. Melinda noticed the entries as they appeared in their account summaries. Small withdrawals, consistent in timing, always linked to the same retailer. She did not confront him. Instead, she adjusted her records. Under a category labeled discretionary, she created a sub-entry: date, amount, location. Each ticket purchase was noted without commentary, without judgment. It was not her role to assign meaning, only to preserve it. Luke, meanwhile, began to talk about the lottery differently. At work, it became part of conversation. Not in a serious way, but in the tone people used when discussing something unlikely but appealing. Colleagues joked about what they would do if they won. Houses, cars, resignations delivered without notice. Luke listened more than he spoke at first. Then gradually he began to contribute. "I wouldn't stay," he said once, leaning back in his chair. "Not for a day longer than I had to." The others laughed, but there was a subtle shift in how they regarded him. Not dismissive, curious. "What about your wife?" someone asked. Luke paused only briefly. "She'd adjust." It was said lightly, but the phrasing lingered. At home, the tickets began to accumulate. Not in large quantities, but enough to require a place. Luke kept them in a drawer near the entryway, tucked beneath unopened mail and loose documents. He did not organize them. He did not track them. He assumed that if one of them mattered, it would reveal itself. Melinda was aware of the drawer. She had opened it once not to inspect, but to retrieve a utility bill. The tickets were there, edges slightly bent, numbers printed in uniform rows. She closed the drawer without comment. A few days later, the routine shifted. Luke returned home later than usual, his movements slightly hurried, his tone sharper. "I forgot to pick one up," he said, more to himself than to her. "The jackpot's up again." Melinda was standing near the sink, rinsing a glass. "What time does the store close?" she asked. 10. She glanced at the clock. 9:32 p.m. "I can go," she said. Luke hesitated. Not because he doubted her, but because the act itself felt misplaced. The tickets had been his domain, informal and unstructured. Handing it over even for a single night felt like introducing order into something he preferred to keep undefined. "It's fine," he said. "I'll just skip it." Melinda dried her hands. "It's on my way to the pharmacy," she said. "I need to pick something up anyway." There was no urgency in her voice, no insistence, just a statement. Luke considered it, then nodded. "All right, just get one." Melinda took her coat, her keys, and her wallet. As she stepped outside, the air carried the cool edge of early evening, the kind that settled into stillness rather than movement. The convenience store was quiet when she arrived. Fluorescent lights cast a steady brightness over rows of packaged goods, the hum of refrigeration units filling the space between transactions. She approached the counter. "1 lottery ticket, please," she said, specifying the game Luke had mentioned earlier. The clerk, a young man with a practiced rhythm, printed the ticket and slid it across. "That'll be $2. Melinda reached into her wallet and paused for a moment before selecting a card. Not the joint account. Her personal debit card, the one she used for her own expenses, tracked separately within her system. She handed it over, completed the transaction, and took the receipt along with the ticket. The receipt was small, easily overlooked. But she folded it carefully and placed it inside the same envelope as the ticket before leaving the store. When she returned home, Luke was in the living room, his attention divided between his phone and the television. "Got it?" he asked. Melinda handed him the envelope. "Yes." He took it without opening it, placing it on the table beside him. "Thanks." She nodded and moved past him, returning to the kitchen. The envelope remained where he had left it. Untouched. Unexamined. Later that night, after Luke had gone to bed, Melinda returned to the table with the envelope in hand. She opened it, removed the ticket, and scanned it briefly. The numbers meant nothing at this stage. They were potential, not outcome. The receipt, however, held information. Date, time, transaction ID, payment method. She placed both items into a clear plastic sleeve, labeled it with the date, and filed it within a folder dedicated to household expenditures. It was not an unusual action for her. Every purchase, no matter how small, followed a similar process. But this one carried a distinction she did not yet define. Over the next few days, the routine resumed. Luke continued to buy tickets. The drawer filled incrementally. The envelope containing that particular ticket remained among them, indistinguishable to anyone who did not look closely. Melinda did not separate it. She did not highlight it. She allowed it to remain within the system, documented but not emphasized. Luke never asked about the receipt. He never considered the method of payment. To him, the ticket existed independently of the transaction that produced it. That separation would remain intact until it could no longer be ignored. On the night of the drawing, Luke sat at the edge of the couch, a cluster of tickets in his hand, the television volume slightly higher than usual. Melinda was in the adjacent room organizing a set of files, though her attention was not entirely on the task. Numbers appeared on the screen one by one, each announced with a cadence designed to build anticipation. Luke checked his tickets quickly at first, then more carefully as the sequence progressed. There was a pause, a shift, the kind that does not require words to be understood. "Melinda," he called, his voice no longer casual. She stepped into the room. "What is it?" she asked. Luke did not answer immediately. He held up one of the tickets, his eyes fixed on the numbers, as if verifying them again would change their arrangement. "I think," he began, then stopped. He looked at the screen, then at the ticket, then back again. "I think this is it." Melinda moved closer, not rushing, not hesitating. "Let me see," she said. He handed her the ticket. She examined it with the same attention she gave everything else, systematic, precise, without assumption. The numbers aligned, not partially, completely. She handed the ticket back to him. "It matches," she said. Luke let out a breath that seemed to release more than tension. It carried relief, disbelief, and something sharper, certainty. "I knew it," he said, though he had not. He stood already moving, already thinking ahead. "We need to call someone. A lawyer. Tomorrow morning." Melinda nodded once. "Yes," she said. She did not mention the receipt. She did not mention the card. She did not mention the record that already existed. Instead, she returned to the table, opened her laptop, and began a new file. Not to celebrate, to document. Because in that moment, while Luke saw an ending to uncertainty, Melinda recognized the beginning of something else. Something that would not depend on belief, only on proof. The morning after the drawing did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with movement. Luke was awake before sunrise, his phone already in his hand, scrolling through articles, checking numbers again, refreshing pages that had not yet updated. The confirmation he needed was already there, but repetition gave it weight. It made the outcome feel less like chance and more like fact. Melinda was in the kitchen by the time he stepped in. Coffee had already been poured. The table was clear except for her laptop closed, positioned exactly where it always was. "They're saying to sign the ticket," Luke said immediately. "Back of it, to secure it." Melinda looked at him, then at the envelope he held. "Yes," she said, "that's standard." He nodded, already reaching for a pen. The motion was quick, almost automatic. There was no pause to consider anything beyond the instruction he had read. Melinda did not stop him. She watched as he turned the ticket over, wrote his name, Luke Woods, in a firm, unhesitating line, and then held it up briefly as if the act itself confirmed ownership. "There," he said. "That locks it in." Melinda's expression did not change. "It records what you believe," she replied. Luke frowned slightly, not fully registering the distinction. "It records my name," he said. Melinda did not respond. Instead, she stood, walked to the counter, and opened a drawer. From it, she retrieved a small folder, thin neutral, in color unremarkable. She placed it on the table but did not open it. Luke had already moved on. "We need to contact someone. A lawyer who handles this kind of thing. And a financial advisor. I'm not doing anything until I know exactly what to do." He spoke quickly now, the structure of his thoughts forming around the idea of control. Decisions, strategy, protection. Melinda nodded. "That would be appropriate," she said. He glanced at her as if expecting more, perhaps enthusiasm, perhaps urgency. But there was none. "You don't seem surprised," he said. Melinda met his gaze. "Outcomes don't change the process," she said. "Only the scale." Luke exhaled something between impatience and dismissal. "Right," he said. "Well, the scale just changed a lot." By mid-morning, Luke had scheduled a consultation with a private attorney, Daniel Brooks, a name recommended through a colleague who claimed to know people who knew how to handle big money. The meeting was set for early afternoon. In the hours before it, Luke moved through the house with a different posture. He was no longer reacting. He was initiating. Calls were made. Messages were sent. Information was gathered. Melinda remained at the table. Her laptop now open, her attention fixed on a series of documents. Not new ones, existing ones. The email confirmation from the store. The transaction record from her personal account. The timestamp aligned with the receipt. The location data embedded in the purchase log. Each piece had already been stored. Now they were being reviewed. Not for discovery, for accuracy. She created a separate folder distinct from her usual system. The label was simple. Date, time, reference, no assumptions, only facts. Luke entered the room again just before noon, adjusting his jacket. "I'm heading out," he said. "Meeting's in an hour." Melinda looked up. "Do you want me to come?" she asked. The question was neutral, offered without expectation. Luke hesitated, then shook his head. "No, it's just initial. I'll get the basics, and then we can figure out next steps." Melinda nodded. "All right." He paused at the doorway, then added, "I'll keep you updated." She inclined her head slightly. "I'll be here." The office of Daniel Brooks was located in a newer building downtown, designed to convey discretion without drawing attention. Glass walls, muted tones, a reception area that suggested efficiency rather than comfort. Luke arrived early. He was shown into a conference room where the attorney joined him shortly after, a man in his mid-40s with a measured tone and a manner that suggested familiarity with high-value situations. "Mr. Woods," Daniel said, extending his hand. "I understand you've had a significant development." Luke nodded, taking the seat across from him. "That's one way to put it." He placed the ticket on the table, careful but confident. Daniel did not touch it immediately. He looked at it first, then at Luke. Before we proceed, he said, I need to ask a few standard questions. The details matter. Luke leaned back slightly. Of course. Did you purchase the ticket yourself? The question was direct, routine. Luke did not hesitate. Yes. Daniel nodded, making a brief note. And the funds used personal, Luke replied. Household technically. Daniel's pen moved again. Is there any possibility of dispute regarding ownership? Luke shook his head. No. The answer came quickly, without qualification. Daniel closed the file. Good, he said. That simplifies things. The conversation moved forward, structures, timelines, tax implications, options for anonymity. Luke listened, asked questions, took notes. Control was being established, or so it appeared. Back at the house, Melinda continued her work. She did not contact a lawyer yet. She did not initiate any external process. Instead, she focused on completeness. The folder she had created now contained copies, digital and physical, of every relevant document. Each one cross-referenced, each one verified. She added a new entry, the signed ticket. Not the original which Luke had taken, but a scanned image captured the night before when the envelope had still been intact. The timestamp on the file placed it before Luke's signature, before the claim, before the narrative had been formed. She saved the file and closed the folder. There was no urgency in her movements, no sense of racing against time, because time in this case did not alter what had already been recorded. When Luke returned later that afternoon, his energy had shifted again. Not frantic now, but focused. They're handling everything, he said, placing his keys down. We'll go through the lottery commission. There's a process, but it's straightforward. Melinda listened. They asked the usual questions, he continued. Purchase funds, any disputes? Nothing complicated. She met his eyes briefly. And you answered, she asked. Yes, Luke said. Of course. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, not confrontational, just present. Melinda nodded once. Then the process will continue, she said. Luke seemed satisfied with that. It will, he replied. He moved past her, already considering the next step, the next call, the next decision. Melinda remained where she was. Her attention returned to the folder on the table. She placed her hand on it for a moment, not as a gesture of possession, but of acknowledgement. Everything that mattered was already there. Not in what had been said, but in what had been recorded. And records, unlike assumptions, did not adjust themselves to belief. They remained, quiet, exact, and waiting. By the end of the week, Luke Woods had begun to move, as if the outcome had already been finalized. The waiting period imposed by the Lottery Commission did not register as uncertainty to him. It was in his mind a formality, a delay between confirmation and access. Nothing more. He spoke differently now, not just about the future, but about the present, as if his position within it had already shifted. Calls came in more frequently. Messages from acquaintances who had heard from colleagues who had confirmed from distant connections, who suddenly found reason to reconnect. Luke responded to most of them selectively at first, then more openly as the attention increased. He did not correct anyone who referred to him as the winner. He did not qualify his statements. He accepted the title as if it had always been his. Melinda observed these changes without interruption. The house, though unchanged in structure, felt different in use. Luke occupied more space within it, not physically, but in presence. His voice carried further. His movements were less measured. The quiet that had once defined their evenings was replaced by a constant undercurrent of activity. He had begun working with two professionals, Daniel Brooks, the attorney, handled the legal framework communications with the Lottery Commission, preliminary filings, the structure of claim. Hannah Pierce, a financial advisor introduced through Daniel's network, focused on allocation, how the funds would be received, distributed, protected. They spoke to Luke directly. Melinda was not included in the initial meetings. This too was not addressed openly. It occurred through omission rather than decision. Luke did not say she was excluded. He simply did not invite her. The distinction mattered. On Thursday afternoon, Luke returned from a meeting with both Daniel and Hannah. He placed a folder on the table, its contents organized in a way that suggested external preparation rather than internal understanding. "They've outlined the next steps," he said. "There's paperwork we need to go through." Melinda closed her laptop and turned toward him. "What kind of paperwork?" she asked. "Preliminary agreements," Luke replied. "Asset protection, tax positioning, standard stuff." He opened the folder and removed a set of documents, placing them in front of her. "I need you to sign a few things." Melinda did not reach for the papers immediately. Why, she asked. The question was not confrontational. It was precise. Luke exhaled slightly, as if anticipating resistance. "It's just to clarify ownership and liability," he said. "They want everything clean before the claim is processed." Melinda looked down at the documents, then back at him. "Clarify what specifically?" she asked. Luke hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer required more detail than he had fully absorbed. "That the winnings are mine," he said finally. "That there's no confusion." Melinda nodded once. "And the basis for that?" she asked. Luke's expression tightened just slightly. "I signed the ticket," he said. "That's what they told me to do." Melinda held his gaze for a moment longer, then lowered her eyes to the documents. She began to read. Not quickly, not scanning, reading. Each clause, each definition, each reference to ownership, to transfer, to waiver. The language was structured to appear neutral, but its intent was clear. It positioned Luke as the sole owner of the prize and required Melinda to formally acknowledge that position, relinquishing any potential claim, present or future. It also included a clause regarding marital property framed as a preventative measure. Melinda turned a page. Luke shifted his weight, watching her. "It's standard," he said. "They just want to avoid complications." Melinda did not respond immediately. She reached the end of the document, then returned to the beginning, reviewing a specific section again. When she looked up, her expression remained unchanged. "I won't sign this today," she said. The statement was calm, final. Luke blinked as if recalibrating. "Why not?" he asked. "I need time to review it," she replied. "You just did," he said, a trace of impatience entering his voice. "I read it," Melinda said. "That's not the same as reviewing it." Luke let out a short breath. "It's not complicated," he said. "It's just confirming what we already know." Melinda closed the document and placed it neatly back on the table. "It confirms what is written," she said, "not necessarily what is true." The distinction landed differently this time. Luke's posture shifted, the confidence that had defined his movements earlier, now edged with something less certain. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked. Melinda did not answer the question directly. "It means I will review the document properly," she said, "and then I will decide." Luke stared at her for a moment, searching for something: resistance, emotion, conflict. He found none. "This is just a formality," he said again, though the repetition lacked the certainty it had before. Melinda inclined her head slightly. "Then it will still be there tomorrow," she replied. The conversation ended not with agreement, but with absence of continuation. Luke gathered the papers, though less decisively than before, and returned them to the folder. "Fine," he said. "Just don't take too long." Melinda did not respond. That evening, Luke made a call to Daniel Brooks. "She's hesitating," he said, "on the paperwork." Daniel's voice, measured as always, came through the line. "That's not unusual," he said. Spouses often want independent review. She doesn't need a lawyer, Luke replied. It's straightforward. Even so, Daniel said it's better if she feels comfortable. It avoids complications later. Luke was silent for a moment. There won't be complications, he said. Daniel did not contradict him. Then the review should confirm that, he said. After the call ended, Luke remained in the living room, his attention divided between the folder on the table and the quiet beyond it. Melinda, meanwhile, had returned to her own work. The folder she had created earlier in the week was now open again. She added a new section. Documents presented for signature, date, time, description. She scanned the pages Luke had given her, creating a digital copy. Not to alter, not to share, simply to preserve. Then she began a separate process, not within the household system, outside of it. A search for legal counsel, not through Luke's network, not through shared contacts, independently. The criteria were specific: experience in property disputes, familiarity with state lottery regulations, a record of handling cases where documentation rather than testimony determined outcome. She found a name: Rachel Stein. The profile was concise, focused, no unnecessary detail. Melinda saved the information. She did not make the call that night. There was no urgency, because nothing in her position required speed, only accuracy. Across the house, Luke moved through the remainder of the evening with a restlessness that had not been present before. Not doubt, not yet, but a subtle awareness that something had not aligned as expected. The process, he believed, was still under his control. The documents, the advisors, the plan, each element reinforced that belief. What he did not account for was the difference between control assumed and control established. Melinda understood that difference. She did not articulate it. She did not need to, because the documents on the table and the ones in her folder would eventually do that for her. Without interpretation, without argument, only by existing. The documents remained on the table overnight. Luke had expected movement, an answer, a signature, some visible progression that would confirm everything was proceeding as it should. Instead, there was stillness. The same stillness Melinda maintained in most situations, but this time it carried a different weight. By morning, the papers were exactly where he had left them. Melinda was already awake, seated at the table with her laptop open. A cup of coffee untouched beside her. The folder she had created earlier in the week was closed, now positioned neatly to one side. Luke approached, glancing briefly at the documents before looking at her. "Well," he asked. Melinda looked up. "I've scheduled a consultation," she said. Luke frowned slightly. "With who?" a lawyer, Melinda replied. The word settled into the room with more impact than its volume suggested. For what Luke asked, though, the answer was already implied. "To review the documents," she said, "and the underlying claim." Luke exhaled, his patience thinning. "That's not necessary," he said. "Daniel already went through everything." "Daniel represents you," Melinda said. "Not me." Luke's expression tightened. "We're on the same side," he said. Melinda did not respond immediately. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the screen in front of her. "That depends on what the documents establish," she said. The statement was not accusatory. It was procedural. Luke stepped closer, resting his hand on the back of a chair. "They establish that I won," he said. "That's already been confirmed." Melinda closed her laptop. "They establish what is being claimed," she said. "Confirmation is a separate process." Luke shook his head, frustration beginning to surface more clearly now. "You're overcomplicating this," he said. "It's a lottery ticket. I had it. I signed it. End of story." Melinda reached for the folder beside her and opened it. Inside were the documents she had assembled, copies of receipts, transaction logs, timestamps. She did not turn them toward him. She did not explain them. She simply placed her hand on the top page. Stories can be simple, she said. Records are not. Luke stared at her, the distance between their perspectives becoming more defined. What is that supposed to mean? He asked. It means I will proceed with the consultation, Melinda replied. After that, I will respond regarding the documents. Luke let out a short, controlled breath. And if the lawyer says it's fine, he asked. Then I will consider signing, she said. The answer was precise. Conditional. Not dismissive, but not yielding. Luke straightened, stepping back from the table. Fine, he said. Do what you need to do. He turned away, the conversation ending not with resolution, but with deferral. The consultation was scheduled for that afternoon. Rachel Stein's office was located in a part of the city that did not rely on appearance to establish credibility. The building was older, the interior functional rather than polished. There were no glass walls, no expansive views, only quiet rooms designed for focus. Melinda arrived 10 minutes early. She carried a single bag inside, which the folder was placed. Not the original documents Luke had provided, but her own compiled record. When Rachel entered the room, she did so without introduction beyond her name. There was no attempt to establish rapport through small talk. The interaction began where it needed to. You requested a review of a lottery claim, Rachel said, taking a seat. Yes, Melinda replied. She placed the folder on the table and opened it. These are the documents, she said. Transaction records, purchase confirmation, and the ticket. Rachel leaned forward, scanning the contents without interruption. She did not react immediately. She read. Minutes passed. Then she looked up. Who currently holds the physical ticket, she asked. My husband, Melinda said. And who signed it? Rachel asked. He did, Melinda replied. Rachel nodded once, returning her attention to the documents. And the purchase, she asked. I completed it, Melinda said, using my personal debit card. Rachel's eyes moved to the receipt, then to the transaction log. Do you have proof of payment? She asked. Melinda turned to a specific page, sliding it forward. This is the bank record, she said. Time-stamped. It matches the receipt. Rachel reviewed it, then cross-referenced it with the email confirmation. Was the ticket ever transferred? She asked. No, Melinda said. It remained in the household. Rachel leaned back slightly, her expression unchanged, but her assessment now more defined. Based on this, she said the ownership is not as straightforward as your husband believes. Melinda did not respond. She waited. In most jurisdictions, Rachel continued, the person who purchases the ticket is considered the legal owner. Possession and signature can complicate that, but they do not override documented proof of purchase. She paused, then added, especially when the funds used can be traced. Melinda nodded once. What would be the next step, she asked. Rachel closed the folder. That depends on your objective, she said. Do you want to assert ownership or negotiate a division? Melinda considered the question not because the answer was unclear, but because it required articulation. I want the record to reflect what is accurate, she said. Rachel held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Then we proceed with a formal claim, she said, and we request a temporary hold on any disbursement until the ownership is resolved. Melinda absorbed this without visible reaction. What documentation is required? She asked. Everything you've already provided, Rachel said, plus verification from the retailer and, if available, surveillance footage. Melinda nodded again. I can obtain that, she said. Rachel's expression shifted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. You've prepared thoroughly, she said. Melinda did not respond to the observation. Preparation to her was not noteworthy. It was expected. The meeting concluded with a clear plan. Rachel would draft the necessary filings. Melinda would continue to gather supporting evidence. The timeline would be determined not by urgency, but by completeness. When Melinda returned home, the house was quiet. Luke was not there. The folder remained on the table exactly as it had been that morning. She placed her bag beside it, removed the documents from Rachel's office, and added them to her system. A new section. Legal consultation. Date, time, summary. No interpretation. Only record. Later that evening, Luke returned his movements, carrying the same forward energy as before, though now tempered by something less certain. "How did it go?" he asked. Melinda looked up from the table. "The documents require further review," she said. Luke's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not what I asked," he said. Melinda met his gaze. "It went as expected," she replied. Luke held her eyes for a moment longer, then looked away. "Just don't delay things," he said. "There's a process, and I'm already in it." Melinda nodded once. "So am I," she said. The distinction was subtle, but it was there, and it would not disappear. The shift did not happen all at once. It unfolded in increments, small decisions that taken together altered the structure of the house, without changing its walls. Luke began staying out later. At first, it was framed as necessity. Meetings with Daniel Brooks that extended beyond office hours. Conversations with Hannah Pierce that required uninterrupted time. The kind of explanations that sounded reasonable when stated and difficult to challenge without appearing obstructive. Melinda did not challenge them. She noted the times, the frequency, the pattern. There was a difference between absence and avoidance. Melinda understood that distinction clearly. Luke's behavior, though not openly declared, began to align more closely with the latter. The first time he mentioned Vanessa Cole, it was incidental. "She's part of Hannah's network," Luke said, removing his jacket as he entered the house. "Knows a lot about private placements. Could be useful." Melinda looked up from the table. "Is she working on your case?" she asked. "Not directly," Luke replied. "Just someone worth knowing." The explanation was sufficient on the surface. It did not invite further questions. Melinda returned her attention to the document in front of her. "Then you'll know where she fits," she said. Luke did not respond. Over the next few days, the name appeared more frequently. Not in detailed descriptions, but in references, conversations, suggestions, shared perspectives. She mentioned something about offshore structuring. Vanessa thinks it's better to delay the claim until the tax implications are clearer. Vanessa's seen situations like this before. Each mention carried a subtle shift. Authority borrowed rather than established. Melinda did not contest it. She continued her work. Rachel Stein had filed the preliminary notice with the Ohio State Lottery Commission. The request was specific: a temporary hold on any disbursement of funds pending verification of ownership. The response had not yet arrived, but the process had begun. Melinda tracked each step: date of filing, confirmation of receipt, assigned case reference. The system expanded not in complexity, but in scope. Luke, meanwhile, moved further into a different rhythm. The house no longer functioned as a shared space. It became transitional, a place he passed through rather than inhabited. On Friday evening, the change became visible. Luke arrived home with Vanessa. There was no announcement, no preparation. The front door opened, and the two of them stepped inside, as if the space had already been redefined. Vanessa Cole carried herself with a confidence that did not require explanation. Her presence was composed, deliberate, and entirely unhesitating. Melinda was at the table. She looked up as they entered. There was no visible reaction beyond acknowledgement. Melinda, Luke said, his tone neutral, almost formal. "This is Vanessa." Vanessa offered a brief nod. "Nice to meet you," she said. Melinda returned the gesture. "Melinda Woods," she replied. The introduction was complete. No one elaborated. Luke moved further into the room, placing his keys down his posture, indicating familiarity not just with the space, but with the shift he had initiated. "We're going to be discussing some things," he said. "Financial strategy." Melinda closed the folder in front of her. "You can use the living room," she said. The offer was practical, unemotional. Luke nodded. "Thanks." They moved into the adjacent space, their voices lowering, but not disappearing entirely. Fragments of conversation carried through terms related to investment structures, asset protection, timing. Vanessa's voice was steady, assured. Luke's was responsive, aligning. Melinda remained at the table. She did not attempt to listen. She did not need to. The structure of the situation was already clear. Time passed. At some point, the conversation in the living room shifted in tone. Lighter, less formal. The language of strategy gave way to something more casual. Melinda gathered her materials, and moved toward the hallway. As she passed the living room, Luke looked up. "We're ordering dinner," he said. "Do you want anything?" Melinda paused briefly. "No," she said. "Thank you." She continued down the hall, the door to the spare room closing quietly behind her. Later that night, the house settled into a different kind of silence. Not the quiet of routine, but the quiet of separation. Luke did not come to the bedroom. Melinda did not go looking for him. In the morning, the evidence of the previous evening remained takeout containers on the counter. 2 glasses in the sink, a jacket draped over the back of a chair that did not belong to Melinda. She cleaned the kitchen without comment. Documentation did not always require paper. Some records existed in sequence. That afternoon, Luke approached her again. "We need to finalize the paperwork," he said. "This delay is starting to affect the process." Melinda looked up. "The process is already affected," she said. "There is a pending review." Luke's expression hardened slightly. "That's temporary," he said. "It'll clear." Melinda nodded once. "Possibly," she replied. Luke stepped closer. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said. "There's no dispute unless you create one." Melinda met his gaze. "Disputes are not created," she said. "They are identified." The words settled between them. Luke exhaled, his patience thinning further. "Look," he said, his tone shifting from controlled to direct. "This isn't working. The situation, the house, all of it." Melinda did not respond. He continued. "I need space," he said, "to handle this properly." The statement was framed as necessity, not request. Melinda considered it briefly. Then she stood. "All right," she said. Luke blinked momentarily, thrown by the lack of resistance. "You'll need to leave," he added, as if clarifying. Melinda nodded. "I understand," she said. There was no argument, no raised voice, no negotiation. She moved to the bedroom, retrieved a suitcase, and began to pack. Not everything. Only what was necessary. Clothing, personal documents, the folder. Luke remained in the living room, his posture rigid, as if expecting a different response that did not arrive. Vanessa stood nearby, silent, observing. Within an hour, Melinda returned to the entryway. The suitcase was closed. The house, unchanged in structure, had already shifted in function. Luke watched as she approached the door. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said, though the words lacked conviction. Melinda placed her hand on the handle. "You asked for space," she said. The statement was not accusatory. It was accurate. She opened the door. The air outside was still the street quiet. Neighbors' windows reflected the moment without interruption. Melinda stepped out. No one stopped her. No one spoke. She did not look back. In her hand, the suitcase handle remained steady. In her bag, the folder remained intact. Behind her, the door closed, not with force, but with finality. Across the threshold, Luke stood in the space he had claimed, the absence now visible in a way that presence had not been. Vanessa moved closer, her voice low. "It's better this way," she said. Luke did not respond immediately. He looked at the closed door, then at the room around him. Control, he believed, had been established. The process, he believed, was still his. What he did not see was the distinction that had already formed between possession and proof, between assumption and record, and between a space occupied and a position secured. The apartment was smaller than the house Melinda had left behind, but it did not feel diminished. It was located on the 3rd floor of a quiet building on the edge of the city where the sounds of traffic softened into distance and routine replaced visibility. The space contained only what was necessary: a bed, a table, a chair, and a narrow kitchen that allowed for function without excess. Melinda arrived before noon. There was no urgency in her movements, no visible weight carried from what had occurred the night before. She placed her suitcase near the wall, set her bag on the table, and stood for a moment in the stillness. Then she began. Not unpacking everything, only what would be used immediately. The folder came first. It was placed on the table, centered, aligned with the edge. Not as a symbol, but as a reference point. Melinda opened it and reviewed its contents, not to discover anything new, but to confirm continuity. Every document remained in place, every record unchanged. The system had not been disrupted. Across the city, Luke continued his process. The consultation with the Ohio State Lottery Commission had advanced to the next stage. Preliminary verification had been acknowledged. The claim was under review. From his perspective, this was confirmation of progress. He had spoken with Daniel Brooks again that morning. "They've received the claim," Daniel said. "Everything is moving forward." "There's just one complication." Luke leaned back in his chair, the word registering without concern. "What kind of complication?" "A temporary hold," Daniel replied. "Filed by a third party." Luke frowned. "Third party, yes," Daniel said. "A request to suspend disbursement pending verification of ownership." Luke's expression hardened. "That doesn't apply," he said. "There's no dispute." Daniel paused briefly before responding. "It has been filed," he said, "which means it will be reviewed." Luke stood pacing once across the room. "Who filed it?" he asked. There was a brief silence on the line. "Your wife," Daniel said. The word settled differently now, not as a relationship, as a position. Luke stopped moving. "For what reason?" he asked. "To establish legal ownership," Daniel replied. Based on documentation, Luke let out a short breath, controlled but sharper than before. "That's not valid," he said. "I have the ticket. I signed it." Daniel's tone remained even. "Possession and signature are factors," he said. "But they are not the only factors." Luke did not respond immediately. "What documentation?" he asked. "That's what we'll need to review," Daniel said, "once the commission requests it." The call ended with no resolution, only process. Back in the apartment, Melinda had already anticipated the development. Rachel Stein had informed her the previous evening that the filing had been accepted and the hold was in place. "It's standard procedure," Rachel had said. "They'll request documentation from both sides. We provide ours. They evaluate." Melinda had nodded. There was no need for further discussion. Now seated at the table in her new space, she opened her laptop and began to organize the next phase. A checklist: retailer verification, surveillance footage request, email authentication, bank confirmation. Each item listed, each item assigned a status. Not urgent, sequential. The phone rang once, then again. Melinda glanced at the screen. "Luke." She did not answer. The call ended, then resumed. A third time, she allowed it to pass. The phone fell silent. Across the city, Luke stood in the living room, the device still in his hand. "She's not picking up," he said. Vanessa, seated nearby, looked up briefly. "Then she's sending a message," she replied. Luke shook his head. "No," he said. "She doesn't do that." Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "People change when money is involved," she said. Luke did not respond. He placed the phone down and moved toward the table where the folder of documents still rested. The same papers he had asked Melinda to sign. Now unopened, unresolved, he picked them up, flipping through the pages again, as if the act might reveal something he had missed. It did not. The language remained the same. The assumptions remained intact. But the context had shifted. Back in the apartment, Melinda initiated the next step, a call to the convenience store. The conversation was brief. She identified the date and time of the transaction, requested confirmation of purchase, and inquired about surveillance footage. The response was procedural. Yes, records are kept. Yes, footage is stored. Requests require formal documentation. Melinda noted the requirements. She did not press further. After the call, she updated the checklist. Retailer contact confirmed. Next step, formal request through legal counsel. She closed the laptop and sat back slightly. There was no visible tension in her posture. No sign of anticipation. Because the outcome did not depend on reaction. It depended on sequence. Later that afternoon, Rachel called. "The commission has acknowledged the hold," she said. "They'll be issuing formal requests for documentation within the next 48 hours. Melinda nodded, though Rachel could not see it. "We'll be ready," she said. "I know," Rachel replied. There was a pause. "Most people come into this stage unprepared," Rachel added. "You didn't." Melinda did not respond to the observation. Preparation was not a deviation. It was baseline. When the call ended, the apartment returned to its previous state. Quiet, ordered, contained. Across the city, Luke's environment reflected something else. Movement without alignment. He had begun contacting additional advisors, seeking reassurance, alternative perspectives, confirmation that the situation was still under control. The responses varied in language, but not in substance. It's a review process. Documentation will determine outcome. Nothing is final until verified. Each statement introduced a variable he had not accounted for. Verification. He looked again at the ticket, now secured in a protective sleeve, his signature clear on the back. It felt definitive, but it was no longer sufficient. That evening, as the light outside dimmed, Luke stood by the window, the city stretching beyond him. Vanessa approached her presence steady. "You still have the ticket," she said. "That matters." Luke nodded, though the gesture lacked certainty. "It should be enough," he said. Vanessa did not contradict him, but she did not confirm it either. In the apartment, Melinda closed the folder and placed it beside the laptop. The day's tasks were complete, not finished, but advanced. She turned off the light above the table and moved toward the window. The city looked the same from here. Distance did not alter structure, only perspective. Melinda stood there for a moment, her reflection faint against the glass. There was no satisfaction in the process, no sense of victory, only alignment between what had occurred and what had been recorded. Because in the absence of noise, in the absence of conflict, in the absence of reaction, what remained was sequence. And sequence, once established, did not require reinforcement, only continuation. The press did not wait for resolution. Within days of Luke Woods' initial appearance at the lottery office, his name had begun circulating beyond local coverage. Not as a subject of scrutiny, but as a narrative already accepted a man who had stepped into sudden wealth and carried it with visible confidence. Interviews were requested, features were drafted, images were captured. Luke accepted selectively at first, guided by Daniel Brooks's advice to maintain a controlled presence. But control, once introduced to attention, became something else. It expanded. The first interview took place in a small studio arranged by a regional news network. The set was minimal, designed to focus on the subject rather than the environment. Luke sat across from a host who framed the story in familiar terms. A life-changing moment, the host said. From everyday routine to extraordinary opportunity. Luke nodded. That's one way to describe it, he replied. The questions followed a predictable pattern. What did it feel like? What were his plans? How had his life changed? Luke answered with increasing ease. The structure of the conversation allowed him to define himself within it. I've always believed in taking chances, he said at one point. You can't stay in the same place and expect things to shift. The statement was not challenged. It was reinforced. Behind the scenes, Daniel observed without interruption. His role was not to shape the narrative, but to ensure it did not contradict the legal position already established. Ownership, singular, uncontested, for now. Across the city, Melinda Woods did not watch the interview. She was aware it had occurred. The notifications appeared on her phone, filtered through news alerts and forwarded messages. She did not open them. Her attention remained on the process. Rachel Stein had received the formal request from the Ohio State Lottery Commission that morning. Documentation required. Proof of purchase. Verification of payment. Any additional records supporting claim. Melinda had already prepared the materials. Now they were being structured for submission. The folder on her table expanded again, though not in volume. In refinement. Each document was reviewed once more, not for content, but for clarity. Dates aligned, times matched, identifiers cross-referenced. There was no need to interpret, only to present. Rachel arrived at the apartment that afternoon, not out of necessity, but efficiency. The materials were easier to review in person. She took a seat across from Melinda, opening the file with a familiarity that suggested she had already anticipated its contents. This is comprehensive, Rachel said after several minutes. Melinda inclined her head slightly. It is complete, she replied. Rachel moved through the pages methodically. The receipt, she said, pausing. Timestamp matches the bank record. Melinda nodded. Yes. Rachel turned to the next document. The email confirmation metadata intact. Yes. And the surveillance request, Rachel asked. In process, Melinda said. The retailer requires formal authorization. Rachel closed the file. We'll include that in the submission, she said. Even without it, the documentation is strong. Melinda did not respond to the assessment. Strength in this context was not a measure she relied on. Only accuracy. Across the city, Luke's second interview was less structured. It took place at a restaurant he had begun to frequent. A space that allowed for visibility without formality. Vanessa Cole sat beside him, her presence now consistent, her role undefined, but assumed. The interviewer, a freelance writer, approached the conversation differently. There are rumors of a dispute, she said, her tone measured. Regarding the claim, Luke's expression did not change immediately. Rumors exist in any situation like this, he replied. Can you clarify, she asked. There's a review process, Luke said. That's standard. It doesn't change the outcome. The answer was controlled. But the introduction of the question shifted the frame. The narrative was no longer singular. It had begun to branch. Vanessa placed a hand lightly on the table, her voice entering the conversation. It's procedural, she said. Nothing more. The interviewer nodded, though the note was made. Procedural. Not dismissed. Not resolved. Back in the apartment, the submission was finalized. Rachel compiled the documents into a formal packet, each section labeled, each reference clearly marked. Proof of purchase. Proof of payment. Supporting documentation. Statement of claim. Melinda reviewed the packet once before it was sent. Not for content, for sequence. Everything was in order. Rachel closed the file. "We'll submit this today," she said. "After that, the commission will review both sides." Melinda nodded. "And the timeline?" she asked. "Uncertain," Rachel replied. "But once they begin analysis, it moves steadily." Melinda absorbed the information without visible reaction. "Then we wait," she said. Rachel studied her for a moment. "Most people find this part difficult," she said. "The waiting." Melinda's expression remained unchanged. "The process is already in motion," she said. "Waiting does not alter it." Rachel allowed a brief pause, then nodded. "That's true," she said. When Rachel left the apartment, returned to stillness. Melinda closed the laptop and placed the folder beside it. There was nothing more to add, only to observe. Across the city, Luke's environment had grown louder. The restaurant, the calls, the interviews, each element added a layer of visibility that did not align with the quiet progression of the legal process. He moved through it with increasing confidence, though the questions had begun to change, not in frequency, in focus. Ownership, verification, procedure. Each term introduced a variable he had not initially considered. That evening, he returned home later than usual. The house once shared now reflected a different arrangement. Vanessa's presence was evident in the details: items placed without discussion, spaces occupied without transition. Luke moved through the rooms without pause, though his attention was divided. The folder on the table remained where it had been, unchanged. He opened it again, scanning the pages as if repetition might reinforce certainty. It did not. The language was clear. But clarity, he was beginning to realize, did not guarantee outcome. He set the papers down and reached for his phone. Another call. Another attempt to confirm what he believed had already been secured. Across the city, Melinda stood by the window once more. The light had shifted. Evening settling into the quiet that followed movement. She did not think about Luke, not directly. She thought about sequence, what had been done, what remained, and what would follow, because the process did not respond to attention. It responded to structure. And structure, once established, did not require reinforcement, only completion. In the distance, the city continued, as it always had, unaware, uninvolved. But within it, two paths had formed, one visible, one documented, and only one of them would determine the outcome. The notice arrived in two forms, one by certified mail, one by email. Both carried the same content, the same structure, the same weight. Luke received his copy just after 9:00 a.m. He recognized the sender immediately, the Ohio State Lottery Commission, and opened it without hesitation, expecting confirmation progression, something that would align with the momentum he had already built around himself. Instead, the language was measured, procedural, notice of temporary suspension of disbursement. The phrasing did not accuse, it did not conclude, it did not explain beyond what was necessary. It stated, a claim had been filed by an additional party. Ownership was under review. All disbursements were suspended pending verification. Luke read it once, then again. The words did not change. He moved to the next section, request for documentation, proof of purchase, proof of payment, any supporting records establishing claim to the ticket. The letter did not reference Melinda by name in the opening lines. It did not need to. The implication was already embedded in the structure. Luke stood in the center of the living room, the document still open in his hand, the silence around him amplifying the shift that had just occurred. Vanessa entered from the hallway, her expression composed. "What is it?" she asked. Luke handed her the paper without speaking. She read quickly, her eyes moving with practiced efficiency. "They're pausing the payout," she said. Luke nodded once. Temporarily, he replied. Vanessa lowered the document slightly. And requesting proof, she added. Luke exhaled the control in his posture, beginning to fracture at the edges. I have the ticket, he said. That is proof. Vanessa did not contradict him immediately. It's part of it, she said. But they're asking for more. Luke turned away, moving toward the table where his own folder remained. They won't find anything, he said. There's nothing to find. Vanessa watched him for a moment before responding. Then you provide what they're asking for, she said. And the process continues. Luke nodded, though the motion lacked the certainty it had carried before. Yes, he said. That's what we'll do. Across the city, Melinda received the same notice. She read it once, then placed it on the table beside her laptop. There was no visible reaction, no shift in posture, because the notice did not introduce anything new. It confirmed what had already been set in motion. Rachel Stein called shortly after. They've initiated the review, she said. This is standard once a competing claim is filed. Melinda nodded, though Rachel could not see it. The documentation request matches what we expected, she said. Yes, Rachel replied. We'll submit our response within the required time frame. They'll compare both sides. Melinda glanced at the folder beside her. Everything is prepared, she said. I know, Rachel said. That's why we're ahead. There was a pause. Have you heard from him? Rachel asked. No, Melinda replied. The answer was factual, not dismissive. Rachel did not press further. Then we proceed, she said. The call ended. Melinda opened the folder once more, not to review, to confirm sequence. The notice was added to the file. Date, time, source, everything aligned. Across the city, Luke had already called Daniel Brooks. They're asking for documentation, Luke said, his tone controlled but strained. Daniel's response was measured. That's expected, he said. We'll compile what we have and submit. What we have, Luke repeated. The ticket, Daniel said. Your statement. Any records supporting your claim. Luke paced once across the room. There are no other records, he said. I bought it. That's it. There was a brief silence on the line. Luke, Daniel said, his tone shifting slightly. We need to be precise here. Did you personally purchase the ticket? The question landed differently now, not as routine, as necessary. Luke stopped moving. Yes, he said. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Daniel did not respond immediately. Do you have a receipt, he asked. Luke hesitated. No, he said. I didn't keep it. Bank record, Daniel asked. Luke's jaw tightened. It was cash, he said. Another pause. Then we rely on possession and signature, Daniel said. And your statement. Luke exhaled. That's enough, he said. It may be, Daniel replied. But we need to be prepared if the other party presents documentation. Luke did not respond, because the possibility once stated could not be dismissed as easily as before. Vanessa watched him from across the room. What did he say, she asked. Luke lowered the phone. We submit what we have, he said. And that's enough, Vanessa asked. Luke nodded. It has to be, he said. The statement was firm, but the certainty behind it had begun to shift. Back in the apartment, Melinda began the final stage of preparation. The submission packet was reopened not for revision, but for formatting. Each document was placed in sequence: receipt, bank record, email confirmation, statement of purchase, supporting notes, everything arranged in a way that required no explanation, only reading. She paused briefly at the receipt, a small piece of paper, easily overlooked. But it carried more weight than the ticket itself, because it did not represent outcome. It represented origin. An origin once documented could not be reassigned. Melinda closed the folder. The work was complete. Now it would move beyond her. into review, into evaluation, into decision. Across the city, Luke stood by the window once more. The same position, a different context. The city stretched beyond him, unchanged. But the narrative he had built around himself had begun to encounter resistance, not through confrontation, through process. He looked again at the ticket in his hand. The signature was still there, clear, definitive, but no longer singular, because somewhere else in a different space, a different record existed, one that did not rely on belief, only on proof. And proof, unlike confidence, did not need to be asserted. It only needed to be presented. Luke did not yet understand the full extent of that distinction, but he had begun to feel it. In the questions, in the pauses, in the space between what he said and what could be verified. Melinda, standing at her own window, did not feel that tension. Because for her, there was no gap between claim and record, only alignment. And alignment, once established, did not shift. It remained until it was recognized. The hearing was scheduled with less ceremony than Luke had expected. No cameras, no audience, no stage. Just a conference room within the Ohio State Lottery Commission building designed for review rather than display. The kind of space where outcomes were determined by documentation, not narrative. Luke arrived early. Daniel Brooks sat beside him, a folder open, papers arranged in a clean stack that suggested preparation without excess. Vanessa had insisted on coming, but Daniel had advised against it. This was not a public setting. Presence in this context needed to be limited. Luke agreed. Control, he still believed, required structure. Across the table, the representatives from the commission entered one by one. Not adversarial, not accommodating, neutral. They introduced themselves, then took their seats. Melinda arrived shortly after. She entered alone. Rachel Stein followed, carrying a folder that mirrored Daniel's in form, but not in content. Melinda did not look at Luke immediately. She took her seat, placed her hands on the table, and waited. There was no visible tension in her posture, no attempt to assert presence, only readiness. The hearing began without preamble. "This is a preliminary review," one of the commissioners said. "The purpose is to assess documentation related to the claim in question. No final determination will be made today." Luke nodded once. Melinda did not move. "Mr. Woods," the commissioner continued, "you are the claimant currently on record. Please confirm your position." Luke straightened slightly. "I am the rightful owner of the ticket," he said. "I presented it, signed it, and initiated the claim." The statement was clear, concise. The commissioner made a note. "Thank you," she said. "Miss Woods, you have filed a competing claim. Please confirm your position." Melinda's voice when she spoke was steady. "I am the purchaser of the ticket," she said, "using my personal funds. I am requesting recognition of legal ownership based on that transaction." No elaboration, no emphasis, only statement. The commissioner nodded. "Documentation has been submitted by both parties," she said. "We will review each in sequence." She turned first to Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, please present your materials." Daniel stood, his movements measured. "Our position is based on possession and endorsement," he said. Mr. Woods held the ticket and signed it, establishing intent to claim. There is no indication of transfer or dispute at the time of signing. He placed the ticket, now encased in a protective sleeve, on the table. "The signature is clear," he added. "The claim was initiated in good faith." The commissioner examined the ticket briefly, then set it aside. "Do you have documentation of purchase?" she asked. Daniel paused. "No receipt was retained," he said. "The purchase was made in cash." The answer was direct, but incomplete. The commissioner made another note. "Thank you," she said. Miss Stein Rachel stood, opening her own folder. "Our position is based on documented transaction," she said. We will present evidence of purchase payment and confirmation. She began with the receipt. This document shows the date, time, and location of the transaction, she said, sliding it forward. The commissioner examined it. Payment method, she asked. Rachel turned to the next page. Bank record, she said. Debit transaction from Miss Woods' personal account. Timestamp matches the receipt. The documents were placed side by side. Aligned. Correlated. The room remained quiet. Luke shifted slightly in his seat. Rachel continued. Email confirmation, she said, presenting the next document. Sent to Miss Woods' personal address at the time of purchase. Metadata intact. The commissioner reviewed it, then looked up. Was the ticket ever transferred, she'd asked. Rachel glanced briefly at Melinda, then back to the commissioner. No formal transfer occurred, she said. The ticket remained within the household. The commissioner turned her attention to Luke. Mr. Woods, can you confirm whether the ticket was purchased by Miss Woods? Luke's posture tightened. I don't know, he said. We both bought tickets. It was a shared habit. The answer introduced uncertainty, not denial, but lack of clarity. The commissioner noted it. Do you have any documentation supporting your purchase? She asked. Luke hesitated. No, he said. The words settled into the room with a weight that had not been present before. Daniel remained still beside him. The structure of their argument had not changed, but its foundation had. Rachel resumed. We have also initiated a request for surveillance footage from the retailer, she said, pending confirmation. The commissioner nodded. Understood, she said. She paused, reviewing the materials in front of her. Based on the documentation presented, there is a clear record of purchase by Miss Woods, she said. However, final determination will require full verification. Luke's expression remained controlled. But the shift had already occurred. Not visibly, but structurally. The hearing continued with procedural questions, timelines, access to the ticket sequence of events. Melinda answered each one with the same measured precision. Dates aligned, times matched. There was no deviation. Luke responded when addressed, but his answers carried less certainty now, not because he lacked confidence, but because the structure he relied on, possession signature, was no longer sufficient on its own. The session concluded without conclusion. This matter will proceed to formal review, the commissioner said. All documentation will be verified. A determination will be issued upon completion. No indication of outcome, no suggestion of direction, only process. The room began to clear. Daniel gathered his papers, his expression unchanged. We'll prepare for the next stage, he said quietly to Luke. Luke nodded. Yes, he replied. But his voice lacked the earlier certainty. Across the table, Rachel closed her folder. Melinda remained seated for a moment longer, her hands still resting on the surface. Then she stood. There was no glance toward Luke, no acknowledgement, no need. Because the interaction had already occurred. Not between them, between records. As they exited the room, the distance between their positions was no longer abstract. It had been defined, not by argument, not by emotion, but by alignment, between what was claimed and what could be proven. Luke walked down the hallway beside Daniel, the sound of their footsteps measured against the silence. What happens next? He asked. Daniel adjusted the folder in his hand. They verify, he said. Everything. Luke nodded. And then Daniel did not answer immediately. Then they decide, he said. The simplicity of the statement did not reduce its weight. Across the building, Melinda stepped outside into the afternoon light. Rachel paused beside her. You handled that well, she said. Melinda looked ahead. It was documentation, she replied. Rachel allowed a brief silence. That's usually enough, she said. Melinda did not respond. because she understood something Rachel did not need to say. Enough was not determined in the room. It was determined before it. In the records, in the sequence, in the alignment. And that alignment had already been established. The rest was confirmation. Verification did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded through layers. The Ohio State Lottery Commission did not rely on the hearing alone. What had been presented in the room was only the framework. What followed would determine whether that framework held. Requests were issued within 24 hours. To the retailer, to the bank, to the email provider. Each request carried the same intent: confirm a line, eliminate uncertainty. Luke received notice of the extended review that evening. The language was consistent with the previous communication. Further documentation under verification. No timeline, no indication of direction, only continuation. He read it standing in the kitchen, the same space that had once felt neutral, now carrying a tension that did not dissipate. Vanessa stood nearby watching him. "What does it say?" she asked. "They're checking everything," Luke replied. Vanessa nodded once. "That's normal," she said. Luke did not respond immediately. He placed the document on the counter, his hand lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. "It shouldn't take long," he said. Vanessa did not contradict him, but she did not confirm it either. Across the city, Melinda received the same notice. She added it to the folder. Date, time, source. The system expanded again, not in complexity, in confirmation. Rachel called shortly after. "They've moved to full verification," she said. "This is the stage where documentation carries the most weight." Melinda sat at the table, the folder open in front of her. "All requests have been submitted," she said. "Yes," Rachel replied. "Now we wait for responses." Melinda nodded. There was no urgency in her posture, because the process had already shifted beyond preparation. It was now evaluation. The first response arrived 2 days later. The bank, a formal statement confirming the transaction. Date, time, amount, merchant. The details aligned exactly with the receipt. Melinda reviewed the document once, then placed it in the folder. Rachel responded immediately. "This strengthens the claim," she said. Melinda did not respond to the assessment. Strength was not the variable she tracked. Alignment was. The second response came from the email provider. Authentication of the confirmation message. Timestamp verified. Origin confirmed. Integrity intact. Another piece, another alignment. Each document did not introduce something new. It reinforced what was already established. Across the city, Luke received notification of the same updates. Daniel called him that afternoon. "They've confirmed the transaction," Daniel said. Luke leaned back in his chair, his expression tightening. "Confirmed what?" he asked. "That the ticket was purchased using Miss Woods' debit card," Daniel replied. Luke's jaw set. "That doesn't prove ownership," he said. "It establishes purchase," Daniel said. "Which is a significant factor." Luke stood pacing once across the room. "It was our money," he said. "Household funds." Daniel paused briefly. "Can that be documented?" he asked. Luke stopped. The question was simple, but it required more than assertion. "I don't have records for that," he said. Daniel's tone remained even. "Then we rely on the argument that possession and endorsement transferred intent," he said. Luke nodded. "Yes," he said. "That's what matters." But the statement no longer carried the same certainty, because another layer had been added, one that did not rely on interpretation. The third response arrived later that week. The retailer. Confirmation of the transaction. Register log. Clerk statement. Time-stamped record. And pending surveillance footage. Melinda reviewed the retailer's response carefully. Not for content, for consistency. Everything aligned. Rachel called again. This is significant, she said. Once the footage is confirmed, the sequence becomes complete. Melinda nodded. And if it is not? She asked. Rachel paused. Then we rely on what we have, she said, which is already substantial. Melinda did not respond, because the question was not about sufficiency. It was about completeness. Across the city, Luke's environment had shifted again. The calls had changed in tone, less celebratory, more cautious. The narrative that had once been presented as certain was now framed as pending. He noticed it, in the way questions were asked, in the way responses were phrased. Once it's resolved, if everything clears. The language introduced conditions, variables. Luke sat at the table, the ticket in front of him. He had begun to look at it differently, not as confirmation, as a point of contention. The signature, once definitive, now felt like a single element within a larger structure, one that was no longer fully visible to him. Vanessa entered the room, her movements measured. They're verifying everything she said. That's not a bad sign. Luke looked up. It's not a good one either, he replied. Vanessa sat across from him. What matters is the outcome, she said. Luke nodded. Yes, he said. But the word lacked conviction, because the outcome was no longer something he could anticipate, only something he would receive. Back in the apartment, Melinda closed the folder. The documents were complete, the sequence intact. There was nothing more to add. Only one element remained. The footage, not essential, but final. She stood and moved to the window, the city stretching out beyond her. The light had shifted again. Days passing not in urgency, but in progression. Each step aligned with the last, each record reinforcing the next. There was no tension in her posture, no anticipation, because the process did not depend on expectation, only on verification, and verification, once initiated, did not reverse itself. It moved forward, until it reached conclusion. Across the city, Luke remained seated, the ticket still in front of him. He did not touch it. He did not move it. He simply looked at it, as if waiting for it to return to what it had been. It did not, because what had changed was not the object, but its position within the record. And that position had already been redefined, not by argument, not by intention, but by alignment between origin and proof. The final response would come. Luke knew that. Melinda knew that. But only one of them had prepared for it. And preparation, once complete, did not require adjustment, only recognition. The final confirmation did not arrive with urgency. It came through the same channels as everything else, documented, structured, unemotional. The Ohio State Lottery Commission issued the determination on a Monday morning. 2 identical letters, 2 separate recipients, 1 conclusion. Luke received his copy at 8:47 a.m. He opened it immediately, standing near the window where he had spent the past week, revisiting the same thoughts, the same assumptions, the same belief that the process would ultimately align with what he had already declared. The language was precise. Final determination of ownership. He read the first paragraph, quickly searching for the outcome before the explanation. He found it. Ownership of the ticket is assigned to Miss Melinda Woods based on verified documentation of purchase and payment. The sentence did not expand. It did not soften. It did not provide transition. It stated. Luke read it again. The words did not shift. He continued. The following sections outline the reasoning. Documented transaction, confirmed payment method, authenticated email record, retailer verification, surveillance footage confirming point-of-sale interaction, each element aligned, each element reinforced. The conclusion was not a decision made in isolation. It was the result of sequence. Luke lowered the document slightly, his hand no longer steady in the way it had been before. Vanessa stood across the room watching him. "What does it say?" she asked. Luke did not respond immediately. He handed her the letter. She read it quickly, her expression tightening just slightly as she reached the central line. "They gave it to her," she said. Luke nodded once. The motion was small, controlled, but final. Vanessa lowered the paper. "Is there an appeal?" she asked. Luke did not answer, because the letter had already addressed that. Determination is final upon verification. No further appeal process applicable under current statute. There was no extension, no alternative path, only closure. Across the city, Melinda received her copy. She opened it at the table, the same place where every document had been reviewed, recorded, and placed into sequence. She read it once, then placed it on top of the folder. There was no visible reaction, no release, no shift, because the letter did not introduce anything new. It confirmed what had already been established. Rachel called shortly after. "It's finalized," she said. "Yes," Melinda replied. There was a pause. "Are you satisfied with the outcome?" Rachel asked. Melinda looked at the document. The wording, the alignment, the confirmation. "It is accurate," she said. Rachel allowed a brief silence. "That's usually the goal," she said. Melinda did not respond, because accuracy was not a goal. It was a requirement. Across the city, Luke remained in the same position, the letter now resting on the table beside the ticket. He had not moved. The room felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because the structure he had relied on no longer existed. Possession, signature, public declaration, each element had carried weight, but none had been sufficient. Vanessa moved closer, her tone quieter now. "We can figure something else out," she said. Luke looked at her. The statement did not register, because there was nothing left to figure. The process had concluded. The outcome had been assigned. There was no remaining variable. He reached for the ticket, lifting it from the table. The object was unchanged. The paper, the numbers, the signature, everything remained as it had been. But its meaning had shifted, not in what it was, in what it represented. It was no longer a claim. It was a record of assumption. Luke placed it back down, carefully, as if the motion itself required precision. Across the apartment, Melinda closed the folder. The documents were complete, the sequence finalized. There was no need to revisit it. She stood moving to the window. The city stretched beyond her, unchanged in structure. Movement continued, unaware, uninvolved. But within it, something had been resolved. Not loudly, not publicly, but definitively. Rachel arrived later that afternoon, not for consultation, for conclusion. The paperwork required to finalize the transfer of funds had already been prepared. Melinda reviewed it once, then signed. Her name, clear, unhesitating. The act did not carry significance in itself, only completion. Rachel gathered the documents. "The funds will be released in stages," she said. "Initial transfer within the week." Melinda nodded. There were no questions, because the process had already been understood. Rachel paused at the door. "You handled this differently than most people would," she said. Melinda looked at her. "How so?" she asked. Rachel considered the question. "You didn't react," she said. "You prepared." Melinda held her gaze for a moment. "Reaction doesn't change record," she said. Rachel nodded. "No," she said, "it doesn't." She left without further comment. Across the city, Luke remained seated. The letter still on the table, the ticket beside it. Vanessa had moved to the other room. The house, once filled with movement, now carried a stillness that did not resolve. Luke reached for his phone. Not to call, to look. Messages had already begun to change. The tone, the content, questions replaced by distance, certainty replaced by absence. He set the phone down. There was nothing to respond to, because the narrative had shifted, not through confrontation, through confirmation. He looked again at the letter. The words remained, unchanged, final. Across the apartment, Melinda stood at the window, her reflection faint against the glass. There was no satisfaction in her posture, no visible acknowledgement of what had been gained, because the outcome was not something she had pursued. It was something she had established. Through record, through sequence, through alignment. The process had not required force, only consistency. And consistency, once maintained, did not require defense, only recognition. The city continued, as it always had. But within it, the distinction had been made between what was claimed and what was proven, and only one of them had remained. The transfer did not happen all at once. It moved in controlled stages, each one documented, verified, and executed with the same precision that had defined the process from the beginning. The Ohio State Lottery Commission released the initial portion of the funds within 5 business days, as outlined in the final determination. Melinda did not track the amount by its scale. She tracked it by sequence. The first notification came through her bank. Incoming transfer, source verified, reference matched to the claim file. She opened the message, reviewed the details, and cross-checked them against the documentation Rachel had provided. Everything aligned. She closed the notification and added the entry to her system. Date, time, amount, source. No interpretation, only record. Rachel Stein arrived that afternoon with the next set of documents. Initial disbursement confirmed, she said, placing the folder on the table. We'll proceed with the allocation plan. Melinda nodded. What are the immediate requirements, she asked. Rachel opened the file. Tax withholding has already been applied at the federal level, she said. We'll need to address state obligations, then structure the remaining funds. Melinda listened without interruption. Investment, she asked. Partially, Rachel replied. But first, stabilization, asset protection, then allocation. Melinda inclined her head slightly. Understood. Rachel paused, then added. Hannah Pierce has requested to join the advisory process. The name settled briefly in the space. Melinda did not react immediately. On what basis, she asked. She believes she can offer continuity, Rachel said. She's already familiar with the financial structure. Melinda considered this. Not emotionally, functionally. Is her assessment independent, she asked. Rachel met her gaze. It will be, she said, if you choose to include her. Melinda nodded once. Then we proceed with a review, she said. There was no attachment to the past role Hannah had played. Only relevance to the current process. Across the city, Luke Woods did not receive a notification. There was no alert, no update, because there was nothing to transfer. The account he had opened remained unchanged. The balance the same, the expectation unfulfilled. He checked it again anyway, not because he believed it would be different, but because the act itself had become habitual. Vanessa entered the room, her movements quieter now. They've started the disbursement, she said. Luke did not look up. I know, he replied. The statement carried no energy, no reaction, only acknowledgement. Vanessa paused. Then we need to consider next steps, she said. Luke finally lifted his gaze. There are no next steps, he said. The clarity in his voice was new, not confident, definitive. Vanessa studied him for a moment. We can't just stay here, she said. Luke looked around the room, the furniture, the objects. The space that had once felt like expansion now reduced to containment. "I'm not staying," he said. The statement did not invite discussion. It concluded it. Across the apartment, Melinda met with Hannah Pierce later that week. The setting was different from their previous interaction. Not a shared table, a professional environment. Neutral, Hannah entered with a measured composure, her expression adjusted to the new context. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said. Melinda gestured to the seat across from her. "Please," she replied. Rachel was present, though she remained silent, observing. Hannah opened her folder. "I've reviewed the current position," she said. "The structure is sound. There are opportunities to optimize long-term growth." Melinda listened. "What are your primary recommendations?" she asked. Hannah outlined them. Diversification across asset classes, establishment of a trust for liability protection, phased investment to mitigate market exposure. Each point was clear, structured. Melinda did not interrupt. When Hannah finished, she paused. "Do you have any questions?" she asked. Melinda considered for a moment. "Your previous advisory role," she said. "How does it inform your current position?" Hannah met her gaze. "It provides context," she said, "but not bias." Melinda nodded. "Then we proceed based on structure," she said. The decision was not personal. It was procedural. Rachel closed the file. "We'll integrate the plan," she said. The meeting ended without further discussion. No acknowledgement of past alignment. No reference to prior assumptions. Only movement forward. Across the city, Luke began to dismantle what he had built. Not physically at first, structurally. Calls were made, accounts closed, commitments withdrawn. The network that had formed around him began to dissolve. Not abruptly, gradually. The same way it had formed. Vanessa watched the process unfold without intervention. Her presence, once central, had shifted to peripheral. Not because she had changed, because the context had. One evening, she stood at the doorway, her posture composed. "I'm leaving," she said. Luke looked up from the table. There was no surprise in his expression. "All right," he replied. No argument. No attempt to alter the outcome. Because the pattern was familiar. Presence, shift, departure. Vanessa paused briefly. "You'll figure something out," she said. Luke did not respond. She left without further comment. The door closed. The house returned to stillness. Across the apartment, Melinda completed the final allocation for the initial disbursement. Each decision recorded, each action aligned. The system expanded, not in complexity, but in scope. What had once been a household structure now operated at a different scale. But the principle remained unchanged. Documentation, verification, sequence. She closed the folder and placed it on the shelf beside the others. Not as an endpoint, as a reference. The past did not require revisiting, only acknowledgement. Rachel stood near the doorway. "You've stabilized the position," she said. "From here, it's growth." Melinda nodded. "Yes." Rachel paused. "Do you intend to remain in the city?" she asked. Melinda looked toward the window. The view was the same, but her position within it had changed. "No," she said. The answer was simple. Final. Rachel inclined her head. "Then we'll prepare for transition," she said. Melinda turned back to the table. There was nothing left to organize, nothing left to document. Only movement. Forward. Across the city, Luke sat alone in the house that no longer held the structure he had assumed it would. The ticket remained on the table, unmoved, unchanged, but without meaning. He did not pick it up. He did not look at it again, because there was nothing left to see. Only what had been, and what had been established elsewhere. Melinda Woods did not announce her departure. There was no statement, No forwarding address shared beyond what was required. No final conversation. The transition occurred the same way everything else had, through sequence. The apartment was cleared over 2 days. Not emptied in haste, but reduced with intention. Items were sorted by use, by necessity, by relevance to what would follow. What remained was packed. What did not was released without sentiment. The folders came last, not because they were most important, but because they were already complete. Melinda placed them into a single archival case labeled with dates rather than titles. The system did not require interpretation, only retrieval if ever needed. On the morning of her departure, the apartment looked the way it had on the day she arrived. Ordered, contained, unmarked by transition. Rachel Stein arrived shortly after. "You're all set?" she asked. Melinda nodded. "Yes." Rachel glanced briefly around the room. "Everything's been transferred," she said. "Accounts are active, structures are in place. You won't need to revisit any of it unless you choose to." Melinda acknowledged the information with a slight inclination of her head. "Thank you," she said. Rachel paused. "There's one more thing," she added. "The commission forwarded a final confirmation this morning. Administrative closure." Melinda extended her hand. Rachel passed her the document. It was brief. A formal acknowledgement that the claim had been completed, the funds dispersed, and the case closed. Melinda read it once, then placed it back into the case. No reaction, no comment. Because closure in her system had already been established. Rachel studied her for a moment. "You don't seem affected," she said. Melinda looked at her. "By the document?" she asked. "By any of it," Rachel replied. Melinda considered the question not for its emotional weight, but for its accuracy. The outcome matched the record, she said. There was no variance. Rachel allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That's rare," she said. Melinda did not respond, because rarity was not a factor she accounted for. Only consistency. They left the apartment together. The building remained unchanged. The hallway, the stairwell, the exit, each element identical to the day Melinda had entered. Outside, a car waited. Not marked, not significant. Transportation. Melinda placed the case in the back seat, then took her position without hesitation. Rachel closed the door. "I'll handle anything that comes up," she said, "though I don't expect there will be much." Melinda looked at her. "There won't be," she said. The statement was not confident. It was confirmed. Rachel stepped back. The car moved. There was no wave, no final gesture, only motion. Across the city, Luke Woods remained in the house that had once defined his position. The structure was unchanged. The context was not. Rooms that had once held conversation now held absence. Objects that had once suggested expansion now appeared static. The table remained where it had always been. The ticket still rested on its surface. Not moved, not discarded, simply present. Luke passed by it without stopping. He had learned not to engage with it, not to. Because engagement did not alter its status. It did not restore what had been assumed. It did not change what had been determined. The house over time began to empty. Not all at once. In stages. Items sold. Accounts closed. Obligations reduced. The process mirrored in reverse the one Melinda had followed. But without structure. Without documentation. Without sequence. Only necessity. One afternoon, Luke stood in the living room, the last of the furniture scheduled for removal. The space echoed slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to register change. He looked around once. Not for memory, for confirmation. That what remained was minimal. That what had been removed would not return. He turned toward the table. For the first time in days, he approached it. The ticket was still there. He picked it up. The paper had not changed. The numbers remained. The signature still visible. But the context had shifted entirely. It was no longer part of a process. It was an artifact of assumption, of sequence interrupted. Luke held it for a moment longer, then folded it once, carefully, not out of reverence, out of completion. He placed it into a drawer, closed it, and did not open it again. Across state lines, Melinda arrived at her new location. The setting was quieter, less defined by proximity to anything specific, a place chosen not for visibility, but for function. The house was modest, structured, contained. The same principles applied. She entered, placed the case on the table, and opened it, not to review, to position. Each folder was removed and placed into a cabinet already prepared, labeled, indexed, accessible. Then the case was closed and stored. The process was complete, not an outcome, in structure. Melinda moved through the house, not exploring but aligning. Furniture arranged, surfaces cleared, systems established. There was no delay between arrival and integration, because transition to her was not a disruption. It was continuation. That evening, she sat by the window. The view was different, the distance wider, the noise reduced. But the principle remained. Observation, not reflection. There was no need to revisit what had occurred, no need to assign meaning beyond what had already been recorded. The past existed in documentation. The present existed in alignment. The future would follow sequence. The phone remained silent. No messages, no calls, no attempts at reconnection. Luke did not reach out. Melinda did not expect him to, because there was nothing left unresolved. Not between them, not within the process, only separation. Defined not by conflict, but by conclusion. Melinda closed the light above the table and stood. The room settled into stillness, not empty, complete. She moved toward the hallway, her steps measured, her posture unchanged. There was no visible indication of gain, no outward sign of transition, only continuation. And continuation, once established, did not require acknowledgement, only movement. Forward. The story does not end where the documents close. It settles where understanding begins. Not in the moment of announcement, or even in the moment of decision, but in the quiet space that follows, where actions are no longer performed for others, and outcomes no longer need to be proven. Melinda Woods did not win in the way most people would define it. There was no celebration, no declaration, no visible shift that demanded attention. What she did was different. She remained consistent when the structure around her changed. She observed when others reacted. She documented when others assumed. And when the process required clarity, she did not raise her voice, she presented it. There is a difference between being right and being able to prove. And in a world that often rewards volume, it is easy to forget that proof does not rely on noise. It relies on record, whether confessions or not. We believe timing matters and visibility define outcome. But the process did not respond to it. It responded to sequence, to origin, to what could be verified. And that instinct invisible, it did not require confrontation. It required acknowledgement. If you stayed with the story, you already understood something. Not everything needs to be argued and resolved. Sometimes the strongest position is the one that doesn't move, because it was built from the beginning. Wherever you're reaching from, whatever time it is, you take a moment to consider what you would hold on to in a situation like this. Not emotionally, but structurally. And stories like this resonate in times that unfold quietly
Strength is measured in consistency and you're welcome to stay to listen. There's always another story. Sometimes